Madam President, once again, I'm here to announce a looming deadline hanging over the heads of our hardworking and patriotic coal miners. It's a shame that we have to do this again, and the reason's because we haven't fixed it the first time. If we don't pass the American Miners Act, there will be 1,200 retired coal miners that will lose their health care by the end of this year. Those 1,200 coal miners spent a lifetime underground, really hard, digging the coal that we needed to become the strongest and greatest nation the world has ever seen. They have always done the heavy lifting. They give up raises and bonuses year after year in exchange for the promises of economic security when they retired. So they paid for this. They held up their end of the bargain, and it's time that we held up ours. Why are retired coal miners' health care once again on the chopping block? We've just gone through this before. Because the courts, our court system, have again allowed coal companies to break their promises to the workers. Through bankruptcy, they were able to shed their obligations to pay for these hard-earned health care and pension benefits, and then they were able to reemerge from bankruptcy as a profitable company once all the money was basically taken from them. This time around, it was Westmoreland Coal Company and Mission Coal Company who both declared bankruptcy approximately at the same time in 2018. For those of you that think this is just another big government program, let me share a little history with you. In 1946, due to the horrendous working conditions our miners faced every day, there was a nationwide strike. It brought our nation's economies to its knees. President Truman dispatched the Secretary of Interior, Joyce Krug, to meet with President of the United Mine Workers of America, John L. Lewis. They ended that strike by singing the Krug-Lewis Agreement, signing that Krug-Lewis Agreement, which created a retirement fund and health care benefits for our nation miners and their families that had the full backing of the United States government. It was not coming from government tax dollars. It did not come from the people of the United States paying for this retirement and their pension plan and their health care. It came from every ton of coal that was sold from that time forward. There would be a certain amount of that set aside. So they worked for it, they paid for it, it was part of their compensation. Unfortunately, over 70 years later, we're still fighting to make good on that promise. And then in the 1980s, with the bankruptcy laws changing the way they did, people were basically walking away. This money was there, somebody got it, and usually through the bankruptcy it was dispersed from creditors and not to the miners who earned it. That's what we're really fighting over, that's what we're talking about. We have the chance today to pass my bill, the American Miners Act, with all of my colleagues here have worked so hard with us on that, to ensure that once and for all, that these coal miners and their wives and children will not lose their health care or pension benefits and get them back. It is fully offset and will not cost the taxpayers a dollar. We're using it for money that we're not only borrowing, but basically from the abandoned mine land money, which we have excesses that still take care of the obligations we have, but be able to use it for the men who mine the coal. And the entire Democratic caucus has co-sponsored this bill when it was filed to the National Defense Authorization last month. Everybody signed on. And if our colleagues here, my senator from Kentucky, would just put it on the agenda, it'll pass. It came out of the Finance Committee last year in a bipartisan vote, very strong bipartisan vote. We all know that we have a commitment to the people who work so hard. So I'm asking all of us to keep our promise just the way we did when we passed the Miners Protection Act. And that saved the health care of 22,600 miners. So we need to finish the job. But guess what? We still have 87,000 miners who are going to lose their pension by no later than 2022 if we don't do something. This adds to another 1,200 who are going to lose their health care by the end of the year. So the crunch time is here. These people basically have worked hard. And let me tell you about the pension. The people that would receive the pension are mostly widows. And you know what the average pension is? Less than $600 a month. Less than $600 a month for the people that have worked for 20, 30, 40 years underground to provide the energy to keep the country, keep the lights on in the country, but kept our country strong and helped us win every war. So I'm happy that my colleagues have joined me here today. I'm happy that my neighboring senator from the great state of Virginia is right here beside me. Senator Kaine has been a champion working very hard for the coal miners in southwest Virginia who have contributed so much to our country and basically worked very close with the miners in West Virginia. We're proud to have him here. So without further conversation from me, I'm going to now turn it to my good friend and colleague, Senator Tim Kaine from Virginia.
Madam President,
Senator from Virginia.
I want to thank my colleague from West Virginia because this is a matter of the heart for him. He has worked so hard on this as a governor of West Virginia and as a United States Senator. It's been my honor to work together with him on this and so many other issues. To begin with, a little bit of history that we're right in the midst of. Virginia, Senator Manchin, the 30th anniversary of the Pittston coal strike began April 5th, 1989 in Southwest Virginia. The Pittston Coal Company, which was headquartered in Pennsylvania, terminated all health care benefits for approximately 1,500 retirees, widows, and disabled miners. And that anniversary is being celebrated right now. It led to a strike when these health care benefits were terminated that lasted from April of 1989 until February 20 of 1990, nearly 10 months. The then president of the United Mine Workers, Rich Trump, who's now the president of AFL-CIO, was asked during this time period, as the miners and their families and the retirees at great sacrifice to themselves were striking, how long can you hold out? They were seeing the benefits they were getting as strikers. Instead of a $600 a week strike benefit, which was the original plan, the funds were dwindled down. They were getting $200 a week. That was all they were getting during the strike. And when Rich Trump was asked how long can the miners hold out, he said, we can hold out one day longer than the Pittston Coal Company. And that's in fact what happened. And in February, they reached an agreement of a historic labor strike that was because of health care benefits, because of the need of people who do one of the toughest jobs in this country, a job that will rack its pain on your body in a physical way unlike any other kind of work. Losing health care is tough for anybody, but for somebody working underground in a mine, it is absolutely catastrophic. As my colleague mentioned, we're here to talk about the American Miners Act, which he is leading and I'm proud to co-sponsor. The UMWA pension plan is projected right now to become insolvent by 2022, and this could be advanced and become even sooner if there's another major bankruptcy. My colleague talked about the history of this pension plan during the presidency of President Truman, and in the aftermath of that strike, there was an agreement that there would be employer contributions into the pension plan based on every ton of coal that was sold. The employer contributions have declined significantly in recent years as coal companies have gone out of business, and other companies have creatively used the bankruptcy laws, as my colleague indicated, to skate out of their obligations to these hardworking miners and their families and retirees. If we do not intervene, if we do not pass the American Miners Act or something essentially identical, 87,000 current beneficiaries and an additional 20,000 vested retirees could lose all or part of their pension benefit. The insolvency of the miners' workers' pension would put further pressure on the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, which is already facing other shortfalls. And it's not just pensions, it's also health care. Because of a recent bankruptcy of the Westmoreland Coal Company, as my colleague mentioned, 1,200 miners and their families, largely widows and others, are slated to potentially lose health care coverage very soon. That would include 800 Virginians who could lose health coverage by the end of the year. I remember when my colleague was leading the successful effort in 2017 to fix one of the issues with health care benefits for these families. I attended a roundtable session with many of them in Castlewood, Virginia, at the UMW field office there. And I went in on a midweek, mid-afternoon time when you wouldn't normally expect a lot of people to attend a meeting, and the room was absolutely packed with people who were so very, very frightened. They were slated at that point to lose health coverage. You remember this, Senator, at the end of April, and it was about the 20th of April that I was there with them. And they were looking at me with fear in their eyes, asking what they should do. Should I go out and buy insurance on my own? But who's going to cover me? Look at my age. Look at my physical condition. Look at the conditions that my wife is dealing with. It wasn't uncommon to be dealing with a working or recently retired miner with a spouse who had cancer. And the threat of losing health insurance in that circumstance was existential. And I could look him in the eye, and I couldn't really promise him anything except that we would try. We were able to get a fix at that point that saved health care for thousands and thousands of miners, and we did that with our colleagues in this body, Democratic and Republican, in the House as well. Well, it's time for us to step up again. Here's what the American Miners Act would do. It would shore up the pension plan to ensure that workers receive the benefits that they've earned. The bill also safeguards health care coverage for workers who are projected to lose their coverage because of the Westmoreland coal bankruptcy. It builds on the bill that we passed in a bipartisan way in 2017. And lastly, and this is really important, and I'm so happy that in working on the bill, Senator Manchin and we decided to do this, the bill is going to ensure financing for medical treatment and basic expenses for workers suffering from black lung, because we are extending the Black Lung Disability Trust Fund. Right now, that is also because of a revenue source that was sort of sunset, would schedule to be stopped, and then the trust fund dwindles down, and those suffering from black lung would also lose the protections that they have. This American Miners Act not only protects pensions, not only protects folks who are having their health care bankrupted by Westmoreland, but would extend the Black Lung Disability Trust Fund that is so very, very important. And the best news, the bill's fully paid for. We're not asking to increase the deficit. We're not asking to, increase tax rates. The bill's fully paid for. We would just simply extend an existing tax to protect the Black Lung Trust Fund, and then we would utilize an existing source of revenue that we used before, mine reclamation funds that are currently oversubscribed and are not being used to help backstop health care needs. So this is a bill that would do an awful lot of good for an awful lot of people. And we're not coming here just asking without paying for it. We've got a solution on the table where we can pay for it. My hope is the body will come together in the same ways we did in 2017 to protect these hardworking people and their families and their widows who have done the hardest work that just about anybody does in this country and whose bodies have suffered as a result, and they need to have us having their back. And with that, Madam President, I would yield the floor.
Madam President, if I could, first of all, thank my colleague from Virginia, my dear friend, Senator Kaine. Just one thing I want to touch on before we have Senator Casey speak on behalf of all the coal miners that he represents in the state of Pennsylvania. But on the Black Lung Fund, a lot of people don't know, the House of Representatives basically 2 years ago passed reducing the fund from $1.10 to 55 cents. I called over at the House and I said to my friends, my colleagues over in the House, I said, you would think that we don't need the money anymore because we've cured black lung. Just the contrary. We have more diseases and more younger people getting black lung, and I'll tell you the reason why. When you're mining coal, you're cutting through, and a lot of rock you're cutting through. And with that, you have silica that comes from that. Now we're cutting and hitting into more rock than ever before. We have more younger miners contracting that. We need the fund more now than we've ever needed it before, and this is not the time to cut it. And that 55 cents a ton means a difference of solvency or not in curing people, or the federal government's going to have to step in. And the coal mining and the coal miners have been proud of being able to pay their own way. They've paid for their pensions. They've paid for their health care. They didn't take money home because when they negotiated, this is how much stayed within the fund. Bankruptcy allowed companies basically to wipe that out completely. Somebody received that money, the benefit, but not the people that work for it. And now they're willing to try to fix that with the coal they've mined through the abandoned mine land money. That's all we're asking for. We'll take care of our own problem. We're begging the majority leader of this respected body to please put this bill on the floor and let the body vote on it, because we've had good bipartisan support. Everybody respects the person that provided the energy that's protected this country. And that's all we're asking for. And there's no one who's fought harder and worked harder on this than Senator Casey from Pennsylvania. And that's another state that borders West Virginia that we're very proud of and work very close with. And they have given so much and have asked so little back. And with that, I yield the floor to Senator Casey.
Madam President.
Pennsylvania.
Madam President, I rise today to discuss this urgent issue of pensions and our legislative proposals to address this looming crisis. I want to commend and salute the work of Senator Manchin, my colleague from West Virginia, for his indefatigable work on this. There's probably a few other words I could use for his determination over time, and not just over months, but literally now over years. Senator Kaine from Virginia, Senator Brown, who will follow me, we're grateful for this combination of states coming together to stand up for workers. We know that this discussion on the floor of the United States Senate takes place at a significant time. The House Ways and Means Committee just passed the bipartisan Butch-Lewis Act, H.R. 397, just on the 10th of July. The House is taking much-needed action, and it's long past time that the United States Senate do the same. In my home state, it's a whole group of workers. Obviously, miners are part of this, a big part of this. Teamsters, bakery and confectionery workers, all of whom, through no fault of their own, are seeing their hard-earned pensions threatened. Failure to act could result in devastating economic consequences to communities across both the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as well as across the nation. Tens of thousands of pensions of Pennsylvanians could be at risk, including, and these are just some of the numbers, 11,831 coal miners and 21,460 Teamsters. Despite the challenges ahead, the good news is we have bipartisan legislation to deal with this crisis, known as the to deal with this pension crisis. The legislation is known as the Butch-Lewis Act. The bill creates a loan program for troubled pensions. It's a common-sense solution that brings the public and private sector together to address this crisis. We must also pass legislation so we can address coal miner health and pension benefits. Senator Manchin, as I referred to earlier, has shown great leadership throughout this process. And we want to thank all the senators who are with us today and others who are not with us on the floor necessarily, but are with us by way of supporting legislation. We have a long way to go, however, and a mountain to climb for several reasons. There are a number of senators around this chamber who, on a regular basis, when a multinational corporation needs help, will pull out all the stops. They will overturn any stone. They will surmount any barrier. They will fight through any wall of opposition or resistance. That's the same kind of persistence and determination and resolve that we need for workers. In my case, whether it's a coal miner or a teamster or a bakery and confectionery worker. But it's long past due that we bring the same sense of urgency to the issues that involve workers as some here brought to corporate tax issues when, just by way of one example, we were debating the 2017, November 2017 and December 2017 tax bill. My God, there was lobbyists all over town and people scurrying back and forth to make sure that corporate tax rate came down, to make sure that the rate that a corporation was paying was lowered substantially. And in the end, they got more than they asked for, in my judgment. And what was supposed to flow from that was an abundance of jobs. A rushing current of jobs and wage growth was supposed to come from that legislation. Of course, it didn't. Some of us were right about our predictions, a prediction that we would not want to be right about, but we were. So if that kind of determination and concerted action, and then the legislative result that flowed from that can be undertaken to help huge multinational corporations, I think the same effort should be undertaken on behalf of workers who've earned these pension benefits. This isn't something extra. This isn't something new. This isn't something other than an earned benefit. And for some of them, they earned it in the most difficult way possible, by going underneath the ground to mine coal, year after year, and in some cases, decade after decade. Tim Kaine, the great novelist, wrote an essay in the early 1900s, or just around the turn of the century, I should say, about a coal mine near my hometown of Scranton. And he described all of the horrors, all of the darkness. He described the way a miner could die. He referred to it as the 100 perils, life-threatening, but he described the mine in a very moving way. He talked about the mine being a place of an inscrutable darkness, a soundless place of tangible loneliness. Loneliness because you can't see your hand in front of your face. And loneliness, of course, if you're injured on the job, or if you have an injury that debilitates you, or if you, in fact, lose your life. Tens of thousands of people lost their lives in the mine. And I know that's a long time ago. I know we've made advancements, but it is still hard work, just as it is to do the job, as I mentioned, the other jobs I mentioned. Whether you're a teamster or a bakery and confectionery worker, just pick your particular work area or union. So we've got some work to do here, and we're going to have to fight through a lot, but we're grateful that we have some momentum and some sense of urgency that may not have been there only weeks ago. And with that, Madam President, I will yield the floor to my colleague from the state of Ohio.
Thanks, Senator Casey, for his work on behalf of workers in his whole 13 years in the Senate, and his work especially for mine workers and Teamsters with the Butch-Lewis Act and pension and health care that's so important. Senator Kaine, who's been a stalwart for these retirees, and particularly in Southwest Virginia, but his work as governor, and Senator Manchin, who was speaking earlier. We need to remind this body that 86,000 miners are facing a looming threat of massive cuts to the pension they've earned. And what people in this body don't often understand is these miners and their widows aren't getting rich from these pensions. These are pensions of $500 and $600 a month. 1,200 miners and their families could lose their health care by the end of the year because of the Westmoreland and Mission Coal bankruptcy. The bankruptcy court could allow these corporations to shed their liabilities. That sounds familiar, where so often big companies go to court. These lawyers and these judges and lawyers don't really understand what collective bargaining is and don't understand the sacrifices these workers made to earn these pensions. Shedding their liabilities is a fancy way of saying walk away from paying miners the health care benefits they've earned. 2 years ago, we worked to save thousands of miners' health care. We have to do it again. We can't leave these workers behind just because of the date their company filed for bankruptcy. We have to make sure they don't lose retirement security on top of that. All 86,000 UMWA, union mine workers, are facing crippling pension cuts. They aren't alone. The retirement security of hundreds of thousands of Teamsters in Virginia and Ohio and Pennsylvania, and iron workers in Cleveland, and carpenters in Dayton and Cincinnati. So many retirees, so many workers, pensions at risk. Congress tried to ignore these retirees, but they fought back. Workers rallied, they called, they wrote letters. They rallied outside the Capitol on 90-degree days in July. They've rallied outside the Capitol on 15-degree days in February. We've seen those camo UMWA T-shirts around the Capitol. They're persistent. They don't give up. Many of them are veterans. They left the mines to serve their country. They went back into the mines. Now we need, as they fought for us, we need to fight for them. It comes back to the dignity of work. When work has dignity, we honor the retirement security people earn. We honor work, we respect work. The dignity of work is about wages, it's about their retirement, it's about their health care, it's about safety in the workplace. That's why I wear this pin as a depiction of a canary in a bird cage. When the mine worker took the canary down in the mines, and the mine worker did not always have a government that stood with them to protect their safety. That's what the union did so many times. People in this town too often don't understand the collective bargaining process. As Senator Casey said, this town is overrun with corporate lobbyists, and up and down the hall in Senator McConnell's office, lobbyists line up and get the favors from the corporate lobbyists, get the favors from the Republican leader. Never does organized labor, never do workers get these same kinds of favors when it comes to support like this. Now, we made people as I said, with collective bargaining, what people don't understand is people give up pensions today, give up wages today to put money aside for their future pensions. We made progress on the Bipartisan Pensions Committee. I want to thank Senators Portman and Manchin and all the members, and Senator Kaine and Casey, all the members of both parties who put in months of work in good faith on this. I'm committed to these miners. I know my friend Tim Kaine's committed to these miners, to these workers, to these small businesses that depend on, for their success and their livelihood, on these mine workers getting these pensions that they've earned. We'll continue to work for a bipartisan solution. If you love this country, you fight for the people who make it work, people like these mine workers. Madam President, I yield the floor.